others, members of Local 36, the Roofers Union in Los Angeles. We're gathered here at Los Angeles City Hall because of a very serious development going on in the world right now, that it's very important that we make our position known. We're getting a lot of information from the government and a lot of information from news stations that do not represent our interests, and the information that they're providing to us is not complete and honest. It has an agenda behind it, and that agenda does not represent working people and our concerns. So the Russian war right now in the Ukraine is the worst military conflict in Europe in 70 years, since World War II. And the United States and NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the European Union, they have an interest in this conflict. They have a bias and a prejudice. And so they only want to take one side and share information that promotes one side. But that side does not represent the interests of working people and other oppressed people. So we want to make sure that our community, our members, the people that we are concerned with, that we have an objective analysis so that we can make an informed judgment about these developments, so that we do not get manipulated and tricked and taken advantage of. So I have a couple of statements that I want to read. The first is from the World Federation of Trade Unions. The World Federation of Trade Unions represents over 100 million union members in 130 countries around the world. It is the largest class-oriented, militant and democratic union federation in the world, and Local 36 is an affiliate from the United States. And so they put out a series of statements starting February 17th, before the actual war, titled "The Goal of the United States." The US governments are not interested neither in peace nor in the security of the peoples. What they want now is a war in Europe. They are doing their best so that there will be a war with Russia. Their goal is to prevent Russia from selling natural gas to Europe. They want the US monopolies to control the supply of liquefied natural gas to Europe that they will transport by ships from the United States. They fought the wars in Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan for energy. Now, once again, it is for energy that they are inciting imperialist wars. Then a week later, on February 24th, after the invasion started, a statement titled "Two Wars in Europe, One Conclusion" by the World Federation of Trade Unions. In 1999, at the heart of Europe, NATO, the USA, the European Union, and their allies bombed Yugoslavia. Today, in 2022, Russia attacked Ukraine in an unfair and destructive war. Nevertheless, where are hidden all those who in 1991 were trying to persuade all the peoples that the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the overthrows of the countries of Eastern Europe were taking place in favor of international security and global peace? The truth was different when there was the Soviet Union. There was a counterbalance. There was a powerful power truly in favor of peace and the people's friendship. After the overthrows, the international balance of power drastically changed. NATO, USA, the European Union waged wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Armenia, etc. The real conclusion is one and only one. The overthrow of socialism in Eastern European countries caused only afflictions. The World Federation of Trade Unions demands the end of the war in Ukraine now too. The Russian attack should stop now. The NATO should be dissolved now, and a substantial dialogue must be held. We assure the World Federation of Trade Unions affiliated trade unions in Eastern Ukraine that we support the efforts to ensure their right to decide alone for their present and their future. The WFTU was and remains against the fascist practices of the Ukraine government, which is a puppet of the USA and NATO. The people of Russia, Ukraine, and all countries should make daily efforts to develop peace through relations of friendship and solidarity. Our common struggle against imperialist contradictions must and can stop the imperialist wars. Then again on March 5th, titled, "Where is NATO?" In Greece, which is where the World Federation of Trade Unions has its headquarters, we have a well-known slogan that we say during our rallies. NATO means wars and dictatorships. This is NATO with the wars in 1999 in Yugoslavia, in 2003 in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Lebanon. Now in Ukraine is sending weapons and wants the continuation of war. NATO wants hostility between the Russian and Ukrainian people. It wants the peoples to hate and kill each other so that the monopolies and multinationals can have profits by drinking the people's blood. The real victims are the peoples, the Ukrainian and the Russian ones. We are with the peoples. We demand the immediate dissolution of NATO. Let me check my phone. Somebody's calling and might be trying to join us, so give me 1 second. Okay, to continue. On March 16th, yesterday, another communication, the president of Ukraine is constantly asking to escalate the implication of NATO by demanding to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That equals the beginning of World War III, because according to the specialists, air fights between NATO and Russian military aircraft will begin. So it is a serious mistake and dangerous adventurism for a president to demand daily the immediate implication of NATO, meaning to push with his position for one more disastrous world war. The right position of everyone at this moment is to immediately stop the war, true negotiations to begin, the Russian troops to depart from Ukraine, NATO to be dissolved, and the rights of the Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine to be respected. So these statements over the last several weeks from the World Federation of Trade Unions to give a broader international perspective from the working class about what are the forces and the motivations behind these developments and what are the risks and dangers that we face if we blindly follow the positions of our government leaders and the news media that works for the corporations, the oil companies, the bankers that have economic and financial interest in the outcome of this conflict. They would rather see us go to war as workers and kill each other, one country against another, like they have us out in the streets, white against black or against Mexican or against Puerto Rican, to fight each other so that they can keep us exploited and oppressed. So lastly, I have a statement on behalf of Local 36. The Roofers Union Local 36 demands the end of the war in Ukraine now. The Russian attack should stop now. The NATO should be dissolved now, and a substantial dialogue must be held. No to the imperialist war, no U.S. involvement, no U.S. soldiers outside the country's borders. Close all foreign U.S. and NATO military bases. Workers must and will intensify the struggle for disengagement from NATO and U.S. imperialist alliances. As workers and trade unionists, the members of the Roofers and Waterproofers Union Local 36 stand with the workers in the Ukraine and the workers in Russia. Workers are internationalists. We are workers wherever we are. We will never be pulled into a war of one group of capitalists fighting another group of capitalists. Let the capitalists fight their own wars. The international working class fights only for the interests of the international working class against monopoly capitalism and imperialism. Capitalist Russia's incursion into the Ukraine is not in the interests of any workers, not the Ukrainian workers and not the Russian workers, and the Russian attack must stop now. But we are not Russian citizens, and so here our highest obligation is to first speak clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. As Martin Luther King said nearly 55 years ago. And this is certainly no less true today. We must speak to the U.S. aggravations, interferences, provocations, and threats within which the Russia-Ukraine conflict erupts. And this eruption did not start last month. It has been hot since 2014. For the 14,000 Eastern Ukrainians who have been slaughtered by pro-fascist, pro-NATO forces in Ukraine supported by the United States in their overthrow of the democratically elected Ukrainian government at that time. And the United States has been flooding the Ukraine with billions of dollars of weapons since 2014 to arm the anti-democratic coup government that has power there now. The conflict has been simmering since 1991, when the United States and its military alliance, NATO, promised, quote, not 1 inch eastward expansion in exchange for the reunification of Germany. But NATO has expanded ever eastward and proposes to place weapons and troops on Russia's doorstep, like the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. It has been cold since the Soviet Russia lost 27 million people fighting off the Nazi German invasion in World War II to save the world for democracy. And the Russians would be anxious about a German, US, and NATO military alliance at its borders through the Ukraine. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, formed in 1949 as a capitalist reaction to the Soviet Union's victory over fascism. The same year, 1949, that the American CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and now the AFL-CIO, withdrew from the World Federation of Trade Unions under US Cold War government pressure to split the international working class as part of the Red Scare terror. Roofers Local 36 in 2016 became the first United States trade union to join the World Federation of Trade Unions since 1949, representing the American labor movement in the only democratic, militant, and class-oriented international labor federation, representing over 100 million union members in 130 countries. But the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. So what now is the purpose of NATO? It must be dissolved. NATO is nothing but an offensive military operation, an instrument of monopoly capital and imperialism. It is the enemy of the working class. NATO has launched wars against Libya, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. It dropped thousands of bombs on Serbia inside of Europe. None of these countries attacked any NATO country. NATO serves no peacekeeping or democratic objective. No U.S. military resources, weapons, or finances must be sent to the Ukraine or any other country. All U.S. foreign bases must be closed and all U.S. soldiers returned home now. The business of imperialism must end. This is the first task of the working class and all democratic forces. Right now, our government cannot pass the Build Back Better Act or the PRO Act protecting the right to organize, and our government sends billions of dollars to interfere with other nations' political developments. We cannot eliminate student loan debt or enact universal pre-K or free public college education or universal health care or the right to housing. But billions of U.S. working class tax dollars are spent on bloody military adventures like the 20-year war in Afghanistan. No to any no-fly zone in the Ukraine. We oppose any capitalist war against Russia. No to sanctions against the Russian people, which only hurt workers. Only international solidarity among workers can finally resolve this conflict and all conflicts. The unity of the international working class is the foundation for peace, democracy, and prosperity. And today, on March 17th, we remember the 600-year Irish liberation struggle against imperialist British occupation. The Irish freedom fighters during World War I were accused by the British of taking sides with Germany. By fighting for freedom from English rule. But the great Irish trade unionist, James Connolly, said, "We serve neither king nor Kaiser." And today, workers, we say we serve neither Washington nor Moscow. We support people's democracy and international labor solidarity, the unity of workers. And finally, we repudiate the jingoist positions of the AFL-CIO and the International Trade Union Confederation, placing singular blame on Putin and Russia for this ongoing conflict. This chauvinistic blind eye to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is intended specifically to split and weaken the labor movement, to make workers from the United States hate and fight against workers from Russia and other countries for the interests of the ruling class of monopoly capitalism. The first sentence of the preamble to the Constitution and bylaws of Local 36 states, quote, "It has been fully demonstrated by experience that organization and unity of action among working men and women is imperative and essential to combat the encroachment of organized and consolidated capital. The AFL-CIO has forgotten this experience. It has sold out the labor movement." We can measure this by the constant decline in union membership since 1949, the encroachment of organized and consolidated capital. We call on the AFL-CIO and the International Trade Union Confederation to join with the World Federation of Trade Unions and unite the workers of the world. We have nothing to lose but our chains. This is the Roofers Union in Los Angeles, Local 36, calling for the end to the war and for the dissolution of NATO and the return home of all U.S. troops and the end to any U.S. weaponry flooding into the Ukraine conflict.